Okay, so I hope everybody can hear me. Good afternoon to those who have joined us. Thank you so much for joining in and participating in our very first virtual True Crimes Book Club. Yay. We are very excited to do this and to get all this started. My name is Elena. I am the Adult Programs Coordinator Librarian at the Dunedin Public Library. Today, I am also accompanied by my coworker, Christina. You just saw her.
Hey, everyone.
She is also, yep, there she is. She is also a librarian at the library, and she will be helping me. She has helped me prepare and plan for this virtual program. And today she will be helping me monitor the participant list and the chat room as well. And we'll be looking and seeing if anybody has any questions there. Currently, everyone is on mute. That includes your microphone and your video screens, but you should be able to access them and turn them on and off if you want, if you'd like to speak. Do keep in mind, though, if multiple people's microphones are on, the sound of the person speaking may end up breaking up or completely stalling out, so we wouldn't be able to hear them well. So just kind of keep an eye on your microphones. And now, before I begin, I did want to give a quick shout out and thank you to our Dunedin Friends of the Library. They are the ones who sponsored this virtual program for us. And for today's meeting, we have planned out to do a bit of a hybrid type of meeting. What I mean is we are doing something of a combination of our author talks and our book discussion groups. And we're sort of putting them together, combining those two formats. So our guest speaker today will actually be speaking for a bit. She will be talking on the history behind the book and the research methods used to create this book. And then what we'll do is we'll open it up for all of us to discuss. Again, if you have something you would like to say, make a comment, ask a question, please feel free to write in the chat box. Christina and I will be monitoring all of that. And right now, what I'd like to do is quickly introduce you to our special guest for our very first True Crimes Book Club online. Today we have Mary Kay McBrayer with us. She is the author of the book we will be discussing, which is America's First Female Serial Killer, Jane TOPPAN and the Making of a Monster. You can hear Mary Kay's analysis and jokes about scary movies on the podcast she co-founded, Everything Trying to Kill You. She is a contributing editor to Book Riot, where she writes the weekly horror newsletter, The Fright Stuff, and co-hosts the literary fiction podcast, Novel Gazing. You can follow her on the Twitter at MKMcBrayer, and also on her Instagram at Mary Kay McBrayer. That's all one word. So I think that's enough for me. I will go ahead and hand it over to Mary Kay.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you, Christina, and thank you all for coming here and taking time out of this beautiful and super humid and hot Saturday afternoon. I'm Mary Kay McBrayer, author of America's First Female Serial Killer, like you said, Jane TOPPAN and the Making of a Monster. And thank you again just so much for having me. This is a delight. It's truly amazing. And I'm excited that y'all read my book and that you cared enough about it to come and talk to me about it. So thank y'all so much. And here's how I decided what to talk about for this talk, because it's always nice, right, to go to a reading and hear the author read their own work. But as an attendee in the past, it's like, I like being read to. I do like that, but I already read your book, so I'd rather you talk to me about it. So that's what I'm gonna do, and hopefully y'all feel the same way, because I'm gonna give a short talk, no longer than 30 minutes. And after that, we'll do the Q&A. And I have also learned, like Christina said earlier, in Zoom and in life, that if you have a question, go ahead and enter it into the Q&A, because you might forget. I know I always do. And then also at the end, right, it takes a little bit of time to kind of warm up and be like, okay, I'm ready to ask a question. So whenever you think of something, just put that in the Q&A. And if you have any issues with technical issues or anything like that, the chat is good for that. And then Christina can kind of flag me down and be like, we can't hear or see you. You're we got to do this differently. So yeah, that's the kind of housekeeping stuff. And like you said, we're recording this, so just in the spirit of full transparency, it'll be recorded. All right, so this is kind of the agenda for the talk. If we're good to go, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I get asked a few questions regularly when I do readings or just like in general life talk. So I prepped some talking points and a little bit of a visual aid to do a deeper dive into answering like the questions that I get asked the most. So the first one is, how did you hear this story and what got you interested? I know that y'all already read the book, so if you read that Many Things Can Be True section, that kind of answers that, but I wanted to talk a little bit more like personally about it as well. So I'll do that. And then the biggest one that I get asked, which is probably the most fun one to answer visually, is how did you do the research? And what were some of the methods? And do you have any cool stories? And has she haunted you? I do have a lot of stories. She has not haunted me yet because I tried to do right by her. But yeah, I'm happy to share those and I'm excited to share that with you. And then the last question, and I usually get asked this from avid readers and writers, is why did you tell the story the way that you chose to tell it? So like why, from these different perspectives, why include the actual newspaper articles and stuff like that. So I'm going to do that in that order, and I'll do it briefly. And at the end, or even during it, if you think of some other stuff, please do ask, because that's the part that's the most fun for me, is talking to y'all, like interacting with you. So real quick, before I change the slide, we're going to start about how did you hear this story and what got you interested. So a little bit of background about me. I did an AmeriCorps term in a mental health facility for at-risk and emotionally disturbed kids. My unit was boys aged 14 to 18. And I found it the case that a lot of people just didn't really want to accept that the kids weren't bad, if that makes sense. Like they weren't just a rotten egg, but that they had some tough decisions to make that wouldn't even be easy for adults. Like, for example, do I obey the law or do I sell a little something on the side to make sure that we can pay for my grandma's diabetes medicine? So it's like really tough choices that they had to make that led them to being like a troubled kid or at-risk kid. And it was hard to articulate that. So that's one thing that got me interested in Jane's story, was like I saw that immediately with her. Obviously, I mean, maybe not obviously, but to me, like I could not hack that life of just living with the kids who had such troubled pasts. I could not hack it at all. So I left after just my 10-month term. And for years afterward, I got the news of different kids who I had worked with in that facility who ended up in really terrible positions. So just to name a few, and none of this is confidential, so I'm not like I'm not like violating HIPAA or FERPA or anything like that. None of it's confidential. It's all been reported on, so you could go Google it and get the same information. But just so y'all know, I am going to show their pictures on the next slide, but I won't disclose anything about them that can't be found on the internet. So these are pictures of Darion Berryman, who I mentioned in the opening of Many Things Can Be True. He was the one kid who was killed because he was mistaken for his father, which is a devastating story and one that sent me like into a true spiral, because so smart, so handsome, like just had everything going for him, just a really shitty situation. Sorry, I might swear a little bit in this. And then you have Michael on the right, who is the one who charged to school with the machine gun. I'm linking to Darion's obituary at the end, and some of the press coverage for Michael as well, because that's a terrible thing that he did. He definitely shouldn't have done that. And I also knew him as a child. So I get how that could happen, and don't support, of course, what he did. But it's just, those are the two that really, I think, inspired me the most to tell Jane's story, because I saw them in her. And I just feel like I should link to their stories, because I know that y'all are responsible readers, and if you've come to a talk like this, you're probably open to accepting that many things can be true. And if there was anything I was going to change about the book, I would probably include them, maybe not their names specifically, but just for their family's sake. But all of that unit that I worked on, I would probably dedicate it to them if I had to change anything. But That said, I originally heard Jane's story on the podcast, My Favorite Murder, which if you're in a true crime book club, you probably are familiar with that, but I'm going to link to that episode in the show notes too, in case you want to go back to it and hear. I think it's Georgia who tells her story, but you probably have already heard that one. But I remember listening to them, and they're mostly a comedy podcast, right? Like they tell you straight up, like, we're not going to tell you all the facts. Don't come here for facts, come here for a story, which I knew. And even still, as I was listening to it, I was like, Georgia, you are leaving some stuff out. Like, I got to go learn more about this immediately. And then I went to research more about Jane Toppin, and I couldn't find a whole lot of easily accessible material. So then I did a deep dive, and now we're going to switch into the what did you do for research section. Basically, I read a ton, and by read a ton, I mean everything. So this is one of the articles that I found about her, just the alleged poisoner arrested. Y'all probably noticed as well in the book that a lot of like the front matter and the back matter, and occasionally in the text as well, there will be like direct replicas of the newspapers, which was really cool, but there's stuff that I found. So it's authentic, it's legit, and all of that is cited in the bibliography at the end too, in case you want to go look more into it, excuse me. But the first thing I did to research is I read Harold Schechter's book, Fatal, which, again, if you're in a true crime book club, you have probably seen Harold Schechter before. He is the talking head in like every documentary. It's him, right? Like just this with the salt and pepper, like very distinguished looking man, just spitting total facts about whatever crime they're talking about. So you probably know him. He has a great series. It's very well reported and researched. And I started there. And even then, I was like, clearly this man knows what he's talking about. He did a lot of the research for me, kind of. But it was so much facts and not much story that, yes, it was very responsible, but I felt like I didn't have a very good look into her psyche, and a lot of the things that were between the lines were kind of left there. So if you weren't looking for it, you didn't find it. So then I was like, well, nobody has written the book that I wanted to read. So then I was like, well, I'm going to try to do it myself. And like I said, Harold Schechter, amazing, super thorough, amazing stuff about all of Jane's, everything that was written about her, he pretty much used. Like, I don't know that I found anything that he didn't cite, but I did find some stuff in more detail that he didn't talk about, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, but I get excited and I get ahead of myself. So after I read Harold Schechter's Fatal, then I did a really deep dive on the internet, which is a beautiful resource, and which I supplemented with my, I was teaching at Kennesaw State at the time. So anytime I would find something on through Google Scholar or whatever, and I couldn't find, I got hit a paywall or whatever, I would go to my university library and they would try to find it for me. I also used Pinterest a lot because there's so much visually that you like, people don't think to write about it, if that makes sense. So like, what were the fabrics that they used, that kind of thing. Like you can see it a lot more clearly than you can hear about it, or like, and the other thing I was talking about before we actually started the call is in the Victorian time, if Jane was doing a good job, which she was because she was a genius, then nobody really paid attention to her. So not a whole lot is written about like the working class at that time. I mean, people have gone back and expanded on the history, of course, but we typically hear about the aristocracy of that time from that time period's perspective. So seeing the photographs was really cool. So Pinterest was great. I also looked up a lot of like cleaning habits because she was the maid of all work at the Toppin house. So had that. And then I want to also give honorable mention to two books that helped me out a ton, which are, let's see, these two. Therese O'Neill's book, Unmentionable, which you can see here. It basically goes into a lot of the etiquette that everyone would have known, but no one would have talked about. So, for example, what did they do when they had their period? Like, that's a really important question for me to know, just from my own personal knowledge. And then also because Jane would have been responsible for cleaning up. Like that was her, she had to do everything. So it was gross. The answer is literally whatever was around, which is absolutely abhorrent to me. But I wouldn't have known that, right, if I hadn't read that book. So Therese O'Neill's Unmentionable, and she has a couple of other books that are also amazing. So that these two images, I was laughing as I was putting these these slides together. This is like a crossover of my main interest. Like this is the Venn diagram of everything that I like to read, because it's, you know, deeply feminist now, like looking back on it, not revisionist in any way, but they were just so repressed. That's the word I was looking for. I don't know why it took me a while to find it, but like these are the people who couldn't say when you wanted a piece of chicken that they wanted a breast or a thigh. Like they could not say those words. That's how like deeply buried all of the issues around women's health and sex and marriage and manners were ingrained in their culture. Like that's why we say that's why we say light meat and dark meat, white meat and dark meat. Now, the legs of the table were too sexy. So that's why we have tablecloths and bed skirts and stuff. So just having that book that really focused on and brought out all of those cultural tidbits that typically were not mentioned in works of the time because they were so taboo was very helpful for me. The Victorian Book of the Dead by Chris Woodyard, he's the editor, was also really helpful because those are all about the customs of death in the Victorian era and Gilded Age. And it's just, it was such a, like a class thing and then a manners thing and a statement of social status. Like the more sad you showed yourself, the better you were as a person. So widows' weeds, when we think about typically the ghosts that we see from the Victorian era, right, are like widows. They're dressed in all black. They have the veils that cover their whole face. They have everything is dyed black, and the black ink at the time was also toxic, which is something I wouldn't have known if I hadn't read these two books. So it's good to know, especially because if y'all remember the chapter where Jane basically organizes Auntie's funeral, pulled heavily from the Victorian Book of the Dead, as well as Unmentionable, because she's the one who had to prepare the body. So the chapter as well, from the perspective of the Undertaker, I pulled on the Victorian Book of the Dead a lot, because the Undertaker in the book is basically like, I can't believe that she would wear that in her funeral. Like, I cannot believe it. He's so like petty and catty. And it was really fun to kind of not only celebrate the customs of the time, but also show the perspective of the person who is exploiting someone's grief. Yeah, so these two books, if y'all want to do a deeper dive into the history behind like the setting, I cannot recommend them highly enough. They are so delightful in a really macabre way, which, I mean, we're all there together, right? True Crime Book Club. Anyway, so when I say I read everything, I mean everything. So even though some of the stuff was hard to find, or it kind of led me astray, like I would be looking at the newspaper and that part wouldn't be in it, or I would have like the wrong date or whatever. There was still so much to be learned from looking at the newspapers themselves. And so not every library has everything you need, but I know that y'all are library folks. So I requested a lot through the library, and then sometimes because the books were so specialized, there was only one copy of them, right? So I couldn't get it on interlibrary loan or even Gill Express, which I think y'all have something different because I'm in Georgia and y'all are in Florida, but I also would be able to find where things were located and do a almost scavenger hunt. So that was a really rewarding thing. I definitely felt like Clarice Starling, like going to the basement of the library to look at old microfilm slides, which, by the way, they are kind of microfilm, but they have like this really neat scanner now, which I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir. Y'all are like, yeah, get to the next thing because you've probably already done this, but it was like a camera roll over here, right? Because remember, like analog camera, they had like the roll where it would pull one over, but it would project onto the computer so I could see it super clearly and zoom in and everything, and it was dope. Yeah, so this is one of the articles that I found. I don't think that this one was featured in the book, or at least like the actual newspaper article was in here. But so I wanted to show this to y'all because it's just such a fun find, or was for me. And I just like would walk into the library, and this particular one was found at Emory University. And I would just walk in, and they would be like, "Are you a student or faculty?" And I'd be like, "No, I'm just." And they were like, "Okay, nice to meet you. Come on." It was just so amazing how they were like they were so willing to share all of their resources. It was awesome. Yeah. So then I saved all of that as a PDF, which is what you're looking at now. And for example, just about like reading everything. So this article, right, is a really good one. The One Murder is Charged. You can see where it was published, if that publication is still around. It was a Thursday morning paper, so there were 2 editions every day, which I cannot imagine the stress of writing for one of those papers, right? Like I had to get one in the night before and that day. I can't imagine that kind of stress, but even though it's the old media, and it was released on Halloween, which is dope. And then I would notice like, so there's another, like shoes were $3.50. Like this woman over here is flying a kite. Down here, it cut off. I don't know if y'all can see it, but there's an advertisement for a whiskey here and then another whiskey down here. And I was like, okay, why are they spelled differently? Why does one cost so much more than the other? And then you could, I would just go down into like, I mean, I know Wikipedia is not a super credible source, but sometimes it helps you find the credible sources. So I would just look up brand names of whiskey. And the most interesting thing that I found, like one of my favorite gems when I was just searching through these newspaper articles, is I found an advertisement for over-the-counter chocolate-covered strychnine tablets, which I then promptly incorporated into the novel, because how could you not? That is fascinating. And they were a treatment for stomach pain. Like, we've come such a long way in medical science. Truly, that is one of the theses of the work. So yeah, I did read everything I could get my hands on. And then, of course, as happens, reading stuff is not the same as experiencing it. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it leaves some stuff out. So a big thing that I did as well is I did a lot of travel. I want to say I did a lot of travel, but really I just did a lot of stuff in one trip to Massachusetts, where my friends helped me out a lot. So big shout out to them. This picture over to the right is of the Taunton Asylum, which is where Jane was sentenced for her, basically the rest of her natural life. I did a ton of historical tours. Actually, Taunton Asylum, I honestly pulled up and was like, oh no, this is still in use. So I just pulled up, snapped that picture, and then went away. It was a really beautiful campus. I know that a lot of the places that Jane stayed are no longer operating, but they have other facilities. But the biggest thing from traveling that I learned was those tours, historical tours, even if they are not about Jane Toppin, which they weren't, because as y'all know, she's basically been erased from history. I went to the Lizzie Borden House. I went to historical tours of Boston, which is where I learned a lot about the anti-Irish discrimination just practices of the time, and just general acceptance of Nina signs in the window of like, we're hiring, but no Irish need apply. And then that's also where I learned the phrase at one of the historical tours of, you either have a maid or you are a maid. That's how stratified the class system at the time was. I can't wait to start doing this kind of research again when it's safe to do it. We did the Lizzie Borden House and one of the Salem witch tours, because we were already there, like how could you not? And so much I learned about Boston, because I mean, I'm sure y'all can hear me talk. I'm from the South, and just architecture and everything is different there than it is here. For example, if you lived in an attic here with no air conditioning, you would die. You would just immediately die. Like my air went out earlier today and I'm like, okay, this heat is just creeping up and I'm going to be okay. Like we're still hovering like below the 80s, but I can't imagine living in like it just would stay there, right? Like we had, even in the old houses, the fans, right, that circulated through the attic, so it blew the hot air through. They didn't have that there. Um, and I'll talk to y'all more about that as well in just a second. But some of these other sites, like the Cambridge Hospital and the Massachusetts General Hospital, were still operating and open. And I'm really lucky that this book was set in Boston because, they're really big on preserving their history. So I got to see a lot of that. And the Jason House and the TOPPAN House, I didn't get to see the inside of because I think the Jason House is gone, but the TOPPAN House is still there. It's just like still in use. So moving right along, let's see. So for the authenticity, again, like the traveling was super helpful. We had the blueprints of like the layout of the house that I talked about. This is the Lizzie Borden house in the background. What's in walking distance, what's it like to walk there, were there sidewalks at the time, how the landscaping was, and then decor was a huge thing for me. Jane's attic apartment is based on the part of the house in the Borden house that the maid Bridget lived in. And I'll show y'all pictures of this in just a second. Let's see, I want to make sure I hit everything. Yeah, I get ahead of myself. So over to the left is the kitchen in the Borden house, which is furnished historically accurately, but those aren't the actual furnishings that were in the house at the time. Nonetheless, I mean, just making coffee was a struggle, right? Like, and Jane did all of this. So I took a ton of pictures of the house, like all of the decor, how I'm sure this wallpaper is more recent, but all of the tools up there, all of the different kinds of brands of what you would have used, like how would you have made sure that your flour didn't have any mites in it if you didn't have a refrigerator to put it in, just all of that. It just really brought everything together. And then over to the right is the wash basin from the attic apartment where Bridget lived, which features prominently in the sexy time part of the book. So this is what I had in mind as I visualizing as I was writing that part. This is a photograph from the inside of the Massachusetts State Library. I think I might be getting that name confused, but that's the one I went to. And this over to the right is the actual court document from her being on trial. So that was kind of magical to see and creepy because it was the same date 100 years before. Like it was June something that day. It was freaky. But this library, while beautiful and accessible, like y'all, I went there for this document and walked up to the counter and I was like, I need this. It's filed here. It's from this year. And the woman was like, I don't think we have that. That's much older than we typically have. And I was like, I'm from Georgia. I need you to look real hard. Like I flew up here for this document. She found it. I asked her if I could make photocopies and she was like, no, you can't. So I took photos and I transcribed all of it over because it's the only copy and it's over 100 years old. So that was, like I said, kind of transportive and also a little disturbing. But yeah, let's see. That document in particular was really important for me because I knew at the time I didn't want to write a courtroom drama, but so much of her life was overshadowed by what was happening at the time, like President McKinley's assassination, the Civil War in the beginning of the book, and the Union Army's drafting of Irish immigrants and anti-Irish discrimination, like I said, and the mourning culture, and all of that stuff was just. I needed to be able to feel like I had lived in that world, if that makes sense, even though I hadn't. Just for a little bit of delight, this is the actual confession that I found in the library. Yeah, and so you have photographs of all the people. This picture here ended up becoming part of the front matter of the book and this photograph as well, which I found, and it was, like I said, a scavenger hunt delight. And so we're getting into the third question that I typically get asked, which was, why did you write the book this way? And I know we're coming up on time to ask questions, so I'm excited for that part. But just real quick, I did study creative nonfiction in Georgia, and I wanted to get the book to feel both real and also to not let the facts get in the way of the story. If that, I know that the way I said it doesn't sound super ethical, but basically I wanted everything needed to be true, right? Like bottom line, nonfiction, everything needs to be true. And if I couldn't verify it, then I wanted it to be plausible. So that's why I did so much research, probably 2 years worth of research before I even put pen to paper. Like, for example, I asked in the beginning, what's her favorite candy? Like, I don't know that. She didn't write that down. No one wrote that down for her. But I could see it being taffy. Like, that makes sense to me. It's plausible without necessarily being factually true. And similarly, if you notice at the bottom of this confession, actually, I think it cut it off, but like here, right? In the middle where it's darkened just because they didn't flatten it all the way out when they created this slide. Some of the words are illegible, and I didn't want to guess at that when I was verbatim including her confession. So I insisted that the designer of the book create that experience for the reader as well. Like, you'll probably notice there were ink blots on the page at some point. That was something that I really fought for because I just didn't feel honest about including words that I didn't see. So I mean, I think it's really important not to violate the contract with the reader that you've established of everything that can be true is true. And then I've also caught a little bit of backdraft for not including that much from Jane's perspective. And that's not because I didn't think I could do her justice. She was largely forgotten, and I didn't think it was fair to pretend too much that I knew all of her mind. So that's why the perspective revolved so much and didn't include a ton of her first person perspective because she's been erased from history. It wouldn't be fair to rewrite history, if that makes sense. And I wanted to have the reader to feel as well of being one step behind her. So they knew what was going to happen, and they were circling all around. So that's kind of why I did the perspective of revolving, and especially I wanted to give a voice to her victims as well, because I think that's really important when you relay true stories, especially when you're talking about the perpetrator. I wanted to make sure her victims had a voice as well. So I think I've actually gone right at or a little bit maybe after 30 minutes, and I would love to take some questions if y'all have questions. This is my favorite part. It does not have to be about the research or writing process, but it can be if you want it to be. I think I can access the...
yeah, you should be able to.
Here? Okay. Let's see. Okay, so Carmen, thank you for asking, said, how long did it take you to gather all your research and publish the book? So I think from the moment I heard the story, it took about a year and a half of research, and then I started writing after about 18 months. But I didn't stop researching while I was writing because sometimes I would be like, well, she stepped into her, wait, were they wearing that kind of underwear at the time? So it would send me like back to researching. So I did another 6 months at least of research while I was writing and then rewriting as well. And I'm really lucky. One of the agents at Mango Publishing, which is the press that published this book, read one of the articles that I wrote at Book Riot and then got in touch with me and asked if I already had a publisher, and then we negotiated from there. So I didn't have to go through an agent or anything, which I think in the future I would do just so I could have just more information and everything. But it was about 3.5 years, I think, start to finish, from in general inception to you holding it in your hand. I think it was about 3.5 years. That's a great question, and I think that I think I would the only thing that I really would like to change about the book is a dedication, but I felt kind of forced about that at the time, so I didn't include it. But now I get to tell y'all about how it was really working on that unit that inspired me, excuse me. Another question. I think,
Michael, he was wondering if there were any survivors of the TOPPAN family alive that may have contacted you.
so that's a great question too, because I, like I said, wanted to be very mindful of victims and survivors. And because it was such a long time ago, I couldn't get in touch with any of the family members of her victims, particularly because we don't know all of her victims. Surviving members of the TOPPAN family, there are none as far as I know. Elizabeth, her foster sister, did not have any children, so there weren't any descendants on that side, and Jane was a spinster as well and childless, so she didn't have any descendants either. The only thing I was concerned about, and I didn't see anyone, I didn't get in touch with anyone, but Amelia Finney was a survivor, and ultimately the one who got Jane convicted because she remembered being drugged. And I definitely wanted to make sure I gave her a voice, so I pulled largely from her story. But I don't think there were any descendants. And if y'all remember, she was in the hospital for a uterine ulcer. So I don't think that was, I'm saying that like everyone knows that makes you infertile. I don't think that that's true, but at the time it was just kind of like, we're going to just like do our best. Don't worry about washing your hands.
Yeah.
So that's a great question. And I definitely wanted to be careful of that. So that was a great question, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have another question from Carmen. Are you currently working on any new research on another serial killer?
So yes, I have a couple of projects in the works that I'm really excited about. There's one that I just learned about of a pair of sisters in Egypt who ran, I haven't done this is like very preliminary stages of research on this one. They ran a brothel and they would murder all of the Johns who came in and steal all of their stuff, which I think is fascinating and weirdly feminist, but their husbands were also in on it. So I'm working on that one. That's again, real preliminary, like that'll be several years before I get to work on that. And then, so that's serial killers. Yes, and then the project that I want to work on next is about a policy queen, and she ran a numbers racket in Prohibition era Harlem. Her name is Stephanie St. Clair. If you all have heard of Frank Lucas, the guy who mentored him is Bumpy Johnson, and Bumpy Johnson was her enforcer. So she is basically the godmother of Harlem and crime at that time. That's the one I'm working on next. She is amazing. I've already done a lot of research on her. She was not a killer. She delegated it, but which I think is even more badass. Like I don't do that. I don't get my hands dirty. I make somebody else do it. But she's really cool because especially we know so much about the Italian and Jewish gangsters of the time, and she was running parallel to them and ended up like holding her territory. Also, she was a huge philanthropist, and I think that validates any sort of law breaking on her part. But I mean, y'all, I love a vigilante justice. I know I shouldn't, but it's very entertaining.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, we'll be keeping a lookout for that too.
Oh, thank you. Don't worry, I won't let it get past you.
And then Carmen also asked, what was the most frustrating thing you faced during your research?
Oh, that's a good question too. I couldn't find hardly anything from her childhood. So a lot of that, I think, made her the way that she was. And I found a lot of information about the orphanage where she was, everything that, like that's how we know about her dad and possibly her family. Different accounts say she had a brother and two sisters. Another says she only had one sister who ended up going by two different names. So it had a lot of conflicting data as far as her early years. And of course, she wasn't a criminal yet. She was a servant. She's an indentured servant. So there was particularly nothing written about her. So I think that was probably one of the more frustrating parts. And then as well, not being able to access a lot of her documents. Like if you are familiar with Harold Schechter, he has the most clout of anyone, and he couldn't, like, they're protected by the state. So I couldn't even get in there to ask them about that. So there's some stuff that's written about her that's under lock and key that is just not accessible. And that was frustrating, but I just kind of took it in stride and took everything that I could. So great question. Thank you.
Well, you did a great job, and thank you for highlighting how you went to the libraries, you actually traveled, and that you were able to find some things that even the librarian thought that they wouldn't have.
Right. And I was like, well, okay, here's all the information I have about it. It might not, like, it's going to be real old. So if there's like a secret spot, sometimes they get filed in special collections and stuff. And I was like, please find it for me.
Yes.
Libraries are, man, amazing.
Yes, thank you. And then Thomas asked, how did Mango Publishing find you?
So let me think of I think the actual article I wrote that had her reach out to me was for Book Riot, and it was the article that compared Carmilla and Dracula, and how I was like, Carmilla is the OG. Dracula kind of pulled off a lot of her horrors. And I wrote in my byline that I was working on this project, and then Natasha Vera from Mango reached out to me and said, I really liked your article. Do you already have a publisher? And I was like, this isn't real. This is not how things work. I know this. This is TV. But it was real. So it was a delight. And then, so I don't really know how you go about finding publishers or agents. I know the big five won't even see your work unless you have an agent, which makes sense, but is also a little bit gatekeepy, kind of frustrating. So I know that might be what what the series of questions was leading to. So if you want to go big, like mine's an independent, like medium-sized independent publisher, which I'm very happy with for my first book. If you want to go bigger, agent is the way to do it.
Perfect, thank you. And then Stacy asked, she's in the early stages of writing a nonfiction book.
Oh.
Do you have any tips or advice you would share on writing or publishing?
So as far as publishing goes, this is really my only experience in publishing a book length work. I have a lot of smaller stuff out, like written a lot for Book Riot, written a lot for other online magazines. I actually really lucked out in getting to meet with other people who have published books. So asking questions like this was super helpful for me. Like, I was like, what would you recommend? Because what should I do? Like, what do you see mistakes happen and all that? So ask everyone you can about the publishing part, because I think it's pretty nuanced. Let's see, as far as publishing goes. Another big piece of advice that I got like I would never have done it because I'm kind of introverted. Like I love talking to people that I already know and people in a small group like this, but out is really kind of nerve-wracking for me. But one of the I think he was an editor-in-chief at Macmillan, told me, whenever you read something that you like, just send them an email or a tweet if you can find out how to get in touch with them, just saying you liked it. And then eventually, like, if you can offer them something, that's great. Because then you're not really like asking for anything until you're asking for it. And that's how I actually got a lot of the blurbs in the front of the book. So publishing goes, like making connections, really building that network. And again, that's something I never would have done because I'm shy. And I even asked him when he told me that, I was like, that's not going to be annoying. And he said, would it annoy you if someone complimented your work? And I was like, no, never. I would never get tired of that. So that kind of encouraged me to reach out to really anyone that I could get in contact with. So again, that's how I got a lot of those, almost all of those blurbs from the front of the book, was just saying, because I love their writing. So I would reach out, try to feature them in something I was writing as well that would get published. And then we have kind of rapport set up. As far as writing nonfiction, The most challenging part to me of putting a book length work together, or even an essay, right, about something that actually happened is our world is not set up in a narrative structure. Like things just happen, and we try to figure out how they're cause and effect related. So for me, what was very helpful was actually mapping the plot of what I wanted to talk about in the book. So I wrote the first chapter first and the last chapter next, and then I wrote the most interesting to me parts, and then figured out how I wanted to get to each place. I don't know that that is the way that most people do it, but for me, writing nonfiction, one of the things that is the hardest, I think, about nonfiction is like everyone can draw their own conclusions because it's real life. So having the theme set out in the beginning, and I wrote a lot of what is the point of me writing this for myself. So I had that to guide me, if that makes sense. So I tried to also not inflate anything that I needed to. I wanted it to make it very like not minimalist, but very bare bones about like this is what is happening. I don't know if that's really what you were asking, but writing and publishing, for me, those are like the biggest takeaways that I've learned from this experience in particular. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, you just never know. You can contact anyone. The worst thing they can do is say no. So
right, or ignore you, and then it's like, oh yeah. Well, worse off than you were before. Yeah. Wow, Michael. So Michael, you worked. Stop it. That's amazing. I'm gonna need to talk to you because that's who I want to write about. Is I don't know if everyone can see this or if you send it directly, but he worked the case involving Frank Lucas and Stephanie St. Clair died a year and a half after Bumpy Johnson. So yes, I'm excited about that, and I have 1,000 questions for you. So yay. What a delight. Yay. Okay, let's go through some of these. I missed them.
One more question here we have from RCM is, why would information about Jane be confidential or under lock and key? It's a research question.
Yeah, I wasn't really clear on that in the beginning either, but I think it's because she didn't have family, so there was no one to take over that, so it goes to the state. Like she was a ward of the state when she was younger, and I'm not sure, I don't think that Massachusetts is an open records place, but I'm pretty sure that's why, is because there was no one, like she didn't have any family at all that they could find. So there was no one to say, I'll take this, it's mine now. So it went to the state, and I guess it's just there. I don't know. I couldn't find it. I couldn't get any answers or anything. So great question that I do not have an answer to. And if you know, let me know so I don't hit that roadblock again, please. That was the most frustrating thing.
And this is just a personal question.
Yeah.
Is there new information that you discovered about Jane's life after publishing the title?
So after publishing the title itself, you mean?
Yes, after publishing America's First Female Serial Killer. Is any news you found out after?
I don't. Nothing is coming to mind offhand. I know that a lot of historians are like, she may not actually be the first one. She's the one we have documented really well. I know that Belle Gunness was significantly before her. The nationality of that serial killer is not super clear. So she could be American, in which case she would be the first one. But most of it's disputed, right? Like she's either Norwegian or American. We don't really know. So I know that that's something that people ask me, and I'm like, well, documented wise, this is the first one. So, and I know that that's sort of disputed historical territory, which is what happens when we don't keep great records or they're really old.
Yes.
Other things that I learned. I don't think so. I tried to be very thorough in the research. I know that sometimes I'll people will come talk to me about it and be like, did you know this about the Victorian time period? And I'm like, damn it, no, I would have included that if I had learning more about the culture for sure. I could have expanded on if I had sat on it a little longer, but nothing, no like facts about her life specifically are jumping out to me.
Thank you. I really
As we
appreciate
get off the call.
Oh yeah. I like that you mentioned culture, especially when you're writing the nonfiction work and how it can influence your characters and really help with the narrative style. So I really appreciate that when I was reading it. It really helped me try to understand where she was coming from when making these decisions. And thank you for including Darren and Michael's information too, and how it inspired you to help you write her story.
Yeah, I know I wanted to, I mean, I tried when I was in school to write an essay about them, and I didn't have any information about them because their lives were so short. Michael is still living, but I'm pretty sure he's serving a sentence right now. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that was, I'm glad that was something that you found important. But as far as the culture goes, yes, and going to those houses was just so opening for me, especially because we have artifacts from the South at that time, but it was so different because the heat here, right, it was a big factor, and there they had snow, and so that was really different. So they had like the pan where you would put the hot coals in, so you kept your feet warm at night. And then so much of our artifacts here are Civil War related or Jim Crow related as well, and it was just a real different geographical experience, as well as I mean, even like that house, the Borden house, it was so interesting to me. And a lot of the historical homes had front porches, and I just wouldn't have thought that. Like, that's a big thing here because that's where you go to get out of the heat of the house. But yeah, and especially because she would have been the one who was cleaning, so she would know all of the houses and like how to get blood out of clothes and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Do we have any other questions that we want to add in here in the chat box? You're welcome to also come on audio too as well if you had any other last minute questions.
Yeah.
And also, I was really fascinated with Elizabeth and how is she so oblivious to Jane? I feel like she would know she would do this to her.
Right.
I was
Yeah,
like, oh no, when she was being killed, I was like, wow, why do you think she was like that with her? I know she wanted her approval, but
yeah, and I think the class for those two women is so different that she was very, at least in my understanding of how she was, very sheltered, very almost childlike or childish in the way that she wanted to be seen, which is a very Victorian ideal, wanting to seem almost matronly, but without the mental qualities of being matronly. So very modest, but also very naive. And she just really, to me, lived up to it, because I remember reading her story and being like, God, how could no one know what Jane was doing? Like, I don't think she could get away with it now, because we don't underestimate people of her stature as much as we did then.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but Elizabeth was one of my favorite characters to flesh out, because we love to despise her, but like you want to identify with her. She's so clueless. Is that what?
She was very interesting. I love reading about her as well.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we got about a couple of minutes here.
Oh, I did want to mention real quick before everyone does go, we do have our virtual crime book club coming up next month as well, but this time it's going to be during a weekday. It's going to be August 28th at noon. That's going to be a Friday. And our discussion topic will be Diamond Doris, the true story of the world's most notorious jewelry thief. So if you're interested, you can join us there too.
Who's the author on that one?
Doris Keane.
What was that?
Doris Keane is the author for Diamond Doris.
Oh, yes. Okay. Cool. I think I've read about her I think Morgan Jerkins is maybe the person I read about, but it wasn't the book. It was like an article about the book. So that was
Yeah.
awesome. That's going to be so fun to talk about.
Yeah, so you can find that information on our Dunedin website or on our Facebook as well. Thank you very much, Mary, for being with us here today.
It was my pleasure. Thank y'all so much for having me. This was so fun. I loved it.